And we're live. It is Monday, the third day of November. It is 8 o'clock a.m. It is the year of our Lord 2025. We are barely, you know, barely 12 hours from the last meeting of this illustrious group, the Mara Book Club, at Politics and Prose for Politics and Prose's special event for Holly Berkley Fletcher. I would like to point out to the proprietors of Politics and Prose, Bradley Graham, my old Washington Post colleague, most especially, that you cannot stiff my friends. We will do a Politics and Prose event with you or without you, even
Live
if you
music.
even if you endeavor to interrupt it and frustrate it by having uh live music playing in the cafe when we're trying to do it, even if you bring in lots of patrons to make a lot of noise, we are going to do it. And I also want to say to my friends at Politics and Prose, you got to stock Alicia Wanless's book, okay?
They
That
didn't have
is,
mine either that I
they
could
didn't have
sell.
yours either? I didn't
Well,
know that. I
Alicia
would have.
said it's on the website, but I didn't see it in the store. So
Okay, guys, you gotta have events for my friends when they have books. I'm sorry, I don't mean to sound like a mafia don, but I take this very personally. You gotta stock their books. It's not optional. So I am telling you all to retaliate against Politics and Prose for not stocking Alicia Wanless's book and not stocking Holly Berkley Fletcher's book. I want you to order a copy of that book
they could just
from
have one. I can even bring it. I could have left them one.
from Amazon.com. I want you to fuck your independent bookseller and buy it from Bezos to show them, because that'll show them. Um, and I want you to go with big tech, big booksellers, and really screw the independent bookstore near you to show them that they need to show more respect to my friends.
Wait, why?
Just
Why are we
saying.
screwing other independent bookstores? Some of them have. Bus Boys and
Be-
Poets has my book, by the way,
because
and did an event for me. Bus Boys and Poets. Go to Bus
Oh,
Boys and
go, yeah,
Poets.
go to Bus Boys and Poets, buy Holly's book, and order Alicia's book. And I'm just saying, I love Politics and Prose. I've literally written two books in that very cafe, and the acknowledgments of both of those books will reflect that. But they did not have an event for Holly, and they did not stock Alicia's book. And this is directed actually at the folks at Alicia's publisher, and when I went to order Alicia's book, the publisher is not making it available to bookstores on normal terms, so I had to pay in advance. And you're not going to sell any books that way, guys.
I
So,
got it on Kindle.
yeah,
I
well,
paid
I
Jeff
mean, look,
Bezos. I'm
we
sorry.
live in a world of plenty. There are many ways to get books, but I'm just saying for the folks at Politics and Prose, you have to consult me before you decide how you're doing your stocking, what books, and placement. I'm in charge of that. I know you think that it's your decision because you're the proprietor. It's not, because we will have future guerrilla events in your stores and in any stores that do not uh, do what they're supposed to do. Do the right thing, guys. We will host. And by the way, it is super inconvenient to have an episode of the Mara Book Club when you cannot hear anything and you don't know what the audience can hear. And I hope those of you who attended live or listened will have will um, appreciate the sacrifice that we made so that you could have bad sound. Um, all of which is a way of saying that the birds are chirping. They were chirping very loudly this morning, such that when my very estimable wife came downstairs, the first words out of her mouth this morning were sparrow party, because the sparrows were making a lot of noise. The sun is not quite shining, but we're going to pretend it is. It's going to be a great fucking day. The cactuses are all lined up, and I think they have a message for you guys.
We're watching Dog Shirt TV, a forking revolution in morning television.
You are watching Dog Shirt TV, and it is a freaking revolution in morning television. And uh,
We'll just
one of the
keep going.
revolutionary features, and there are many, is that we will take the show on the road to bookstores that don't do the right thing. And another one of the revolutionary features is that if you missed the Mara Book Club last night, uh, it will be posted, as are all the other episodes of the Mara Bookstore on Dogshirt TV, but it will be restricted to paid subscribers. It's the only thing that's really restricted to paid subscribers, other than certain amusing parts of posts and whatnot. But basically, all these episodes, they're all free. Dogshirt TV, everybody available to everything. Everything's available to everybody, except you can't come live, and the Mara Book Club is restricted. And that's it. That's all I got with that revolutionary feature. But there's another revolutionary feature of the show, because, as I say, there are many, and that is that we get to collectively decide which authors we want to hear from in the coming weeks. So, guys, if you know of a book that's coming out where you really want to hear from the author, shoot me a note, pop up on screen, make your voice heard, because, this is your book club. What we're looking for, generally speaking, new nonfiction with authors who have sufficiently little sense of shame to come on a show and talk about it like this, and they are going to propose the fiction wine pairings. However, if you have an idea, as I believe, was it Kate who originally suggested pairing Tinker Tailor with a Spy Among Friends? Let us know. We're open to variation. We're not hidebound. We're not
Who's
like
Carol
Nathan
T?
Price. We're not. Sorry, Carol T. Did it. My apologies. We're not, rigid authoritarians. We're gentle authoritarians. So, just propose things, whatever they may be, and we're going to work with that. So, hey, folks,
Does
that's
it
a
have to be new nonfiction?
no, no. It's often, it's often easiest to get people to do new
So here's
nonfiction.
here's an idea. If you're not doing new nonfiction, and because I know you know him, and because he's too good for me, and I would like to force him to be on a show with me. Tim Miller's book was very good. Why We Did It. I really, really enjoyed it. And I would be super interested to see what fiction he would pair with that.
That is an interesting idea.
And
I can
it's ever relevant as the
yeah,
Trump era continues.
it's never going out of date, that book. I will shoot a note to Tim. I'm happy to do an episode with Tim, and I also think I don't know. There's a lot of options here, so we're going to
It's
sketch
really
out a
good. It's
schedule.
very readable. It's very fun.
Yeah, so send me, folks, your suggestions, and over the next 48 hours, I'm going to compile a list of suggestions. Generally speaking, we're going to start with the nonfiction author and let the pairing go from there, but may be exceptions. If you have a piece of fiction that you really want to talk about, we can work with that. So let me know. How do you send suggestions? So the answer is I'm going to put out a call for suggestions in today's Dog Shirt Daily. And I'm only interested in suggestions from the Greek chorus, not from the expanded Greek chorus. That is the people who are uh, actually paid subscribers. So you can just leave your suggestions in the comments. I do read all the comments because it's restricted to the people that I care about. So I read all the comments on all the stuff, and so just leave your ideas in the comments, or you can send them to me via the Dog Shirt Daily chat, or you can email me if you happen to know my email address, though I'm not very good about actually reading emails, so that may not be the best way to do it. And you know, let's put some ideas on the table. Folks, we're not allowed to have fun anymore, but we are allowed to crash politics and prose, do a book club there against their will, and get away with it. So that's kind
And
of something like fun.
Holly did a little secret operation while I was there as well.
What?
That was
Oh
very
yeah,
good.
you are you going to
Yeah.
tell us about that?
I don't know. Do you think I should tell or should I keep
I
it to
do.
myself?
I think you should tell because I, as you know, Holly, believe in signing your work.
Yeah, so what I did was I had a bunch of I still have a bunch of bookmarks from my publishers promoting my book with the QR code and all that. And I went and found all the sort of more bestseller types and new releases that are related in topic to my book, and I put bookmarks in all those books.
Yeah, it's a good move. It's kind of guerrilla marketing. They'll never know what hit them. It's kind of subliminal. No, John, Holly did not sign
Because they
her
didn't
own
have my
books because
book that I
they
could
didn't
find.
have it. They don't. Yeah, this is gets back to the deep betrayal, the treason, one might say, of politics and prose. It's almost like you went down the street to Comet Pizza and they didn't have a place to molest kids. And like what would you do if that happened?
At least I
And
couldn't find my book. If they had it, I couldn't find it. I looked in new releases, I looked in religion. I don't know. I couldn't find it.
it's a betrayal. It's capital T, capital R, capital EASON, treason? Question mark. Um, so look, um, I'm just saying, guys, you know what to do. Politics and Prose, call them, let them know, and let them know that they should be stocking Alicia's book too. Yeah, it's just, hey, we got two co-hosts here who are being done dirty by Politics and Prose, and I just want to, shiv them in the gut. Um,
Wow,
all
that's
right,
a bit
Holly,
much.
what is on your mind this morning?
That's a bit much. Well, it's been a very busy week of African news. So if you want to be really depressed, we can talk about that. If you don't want to be really depressed, we can talk about my week last week, which was good.
Well,
Um,
let's start with Tanzania, move on to other depressing African news, and then we will finish on the highlight uh, on an up note of your reception at Stanford.
Um, yeah, well, before we get to Tanzania, I'm sure everybody's seen that Donald Trump is apparently going to invade Nigeria, so that'll be fun. Did you see that?
I didn't. I missed that one among the
So
pending invasions that we
he's
have
very
scheduled.
upset that Christians are being killed in Nigeria. Of course, this has been going. He was also this is one of the Africa topics that I happen to know that he was one of the very few that he was interested in, and others in his administration were interested in the first term, and that is, as you know, well, as many people know, but not everyone, of course. Nigeria is very much a divided north-south. The south is primarily Christian, the north is primarily Muslim, and Boko Haram is an extremist Islamist group in the north that is very violent and creates havoc for Muslims and Christians, by the
Yeah.
way. Um,
Boko Haram, really bad.
and is kidnaps girls and like all kinds of bad stuff. They're terrible. They've been around a long time, and they're a huge security challenge for the Nigerian government, which is trying, has been and still is, tries to combat them with U.S. support. I should say we've long partnered with Nigeria and other African countries against terrorist groups. But apparently, in the last couple of weeks, there was a particularly bad incident of where they killed a bunch of Christians in Nigeria, which is very bad. But now Donald Trump is, deciding this cannot stand, and he's got to do something about it. And so, of course, one of the things he did about it, which was actually helped Boko Haram, and that is cutting all U.S. aid, which that soft power helps counter extremism. There's a lot of programming that helps directly try to counter extremism, but then also just the aid provided counters because terrorist groups use aid and goodies as well to try to gain followers as well. So cutting U.S. aid, if he wanted to combat Boko Haram, not really helpful at all, not helpful at all. And I assume AFRICOM is still partnering with the Nigerian government against Boko Haram. But he made it sound like we're maybe going to invade Nigeria, which I'm sure will go super well.
Yeah, how many people, how many, just Nigeria, if memory serves, is the most populous country in Africa. How many people live there?
Oh, I don't know off the top of my head, but it is the most populous country in
I think
Africa.
it's like 60 million people or something.
It's huge. It's very densely populated, particularly in the
Yeah.
south. But
Is it, do you think that a large percentage of Nigerians are interested in being occupied by the United States?
no, no, no.
Okay,
Although
just
actually,
checking.
Nigeria. Fun fact: Nigeria is one of the African countries probably most influenced by white evangelicalism, American white evangelicalism, and there's a lot of ties there. And actually, Nigeria is outside the United States. Nigeria is most. Trump has a lot of fans in Nigeria because of the white evangelical influence. So there's a lot of MAGAs in Nigeria. There's a lot of Christian
Interesting.
nationalists in.
I
Yeah.
suspect there would be fewer if there were U.S. troops there.
I don't know. Well,
Just,
I assume they would go into the north. Of course, there's been civil war in Nigeria, and there's animosity between the north and the south. So if he sent U.S. troops into the north, his fans are in the south. They're the Christians, and so. But I think it would greatly inflame tensions between the north and the south for sure. And
so
yeah,
should I tell you my Africa evangelical story of the week?
sure. I don't think
I
I
don't,
can
I don't,
stop you. It's
I
your
don't,
show.
I don't think there are that many Ben Wittes African
Yeah, I
evangelical.
this is a curveball. I didn't
So
think
I
we
am
had any.
I flew home the other night from North Carolina where I was giving a speech, and y'all should watch that
Yeah,
speech. It's
I
on.
listened to it. It was very good.
If I do say so myself,
It was really good.
it was excellent.
Hmm.
But one of the things about giving a speech in North Carolina is you have to get home, and so I flew home. And one of the things about flying into the airport is you got to get from the airport to your house, and that involved an Uber. And the Uber driver picked me up, and he immediately it was clear to me that he was from one of the, I don't know, I could have guessed 10 countries and I would have gotten it probably in number 10. But this was right as the hurricane was hitting Jamaica, and I, said something about, things looking really bad for Jamaica. And he went off on a riff
Mm.
about how Jamaicans had chosen voodoo over God, and that this was God's retribution. And uh, so I asked him where he was from, and he was from, as it turned out, the Central African Republic. And
Wow, that's really not a common one.
it's not a, that's why I said I could have gotten
And
within
I
10,
don't think
but I
they're
would have.
especially evangelical there either. So
Well,
that's
he is grew up especially evangelical, except the more he talked, and he talked the entire way,
wow.
the less evangelical he sounded, because he clearly grown up that way, and he had this uh, pot of resentment directed at the Jamaicans, even though I pointed out to him that voodoo is really a Haitian thing, not a Jamaican thing.
I think
Um,
Jamaica is actually pretty Christian.
yeah, but people in the Caribbean was the theme. But then he started talking about the people in his church, or the church he grew up in, and he had really almost as much contempt for them as 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 he had for Jamaicans. And so I finally, as we are going over the Key Bridge into Georgetown, I said to him, "So wait, do you still go to church?" And he said, "Oh no." And I said, um, "So where are you these days?" He says, points at his radio, which is playing WETA, which is our local classical music station. And he says, "I've got my music, I've got my God, and that's all I need." And so
Fascinating.
weird kind of ex-evangelical from the Central African Republic who's uh, you
Have
know,
many of those.
idea of contemporary religion has retained the contempt for tribal religions of any kind, but has
Wow.
lost his faith otherwise and does not want to hang out with Christians
And likes classical music.
and listens to classical
This
music
guy,
as
this
his
guy
means of
explodes multiple
communing with God
categories.
as
Yeah,
his means of communing with God. And so I
fascinating.
thought it was interesting. I had a different view of the hurricane in Jamaica, which was a little bit more, oh shit, there's going to be a lot of people killed, and not a whole lot, not really inclined to blame them for their religious practices, which are, of course, not voodoo in any event. But I was interested in his journey.
Well, they like it's not voodoo, but it is kind of like Rasta, the Rastafari, and that's a kind of additional. That's kind of a religious-ish cultural movement. So I'm not sure,
Yeah,
but I
he
do
he
think.
he complained about that too.
Okay, well,
That
I
they
think that they are
that they
actually
they
quite
they didn't know the
Christian, though.
difference between Jesus and Bob Marley.
I
That was
think
one of
that
his lines.
I think they're pretty Christian actually, and there's a fair amount of syncretism, I'm sure, but anyway, so I guess that might be the next war that we're involved in after we bomb all of the fishermen in the Caribbean. Is we're gonna go invade Nigeria? Maybe, I don't know. We'll see how popular that is. I
Yeah,
don't.
that one's not going to happen.
Yeah, I don't think so. I don't think
I
so either.
mean, you know,
But he's really
that's that.
outright. He doesn't care about, he. I don't think he's tweeted or can be bothered to talk about Sudan, which is there's an actual genocide, especially right now. That was the extra depressing story I was going to include today. I don't think he's all that interested in that, except as a means to get his Nobel Peace Prize. And I don't think I don't think he's upset about terrorists in Somalia under out the guise of Al Shabaab. They've been it's been 20 years that they've been terrorizing people, but those people are Muslims, so I don't think he's that
Right.
concerned about that. And, there's various other tragedies. Of course, he fixed the Congo, which is very nice of him. Apparently, according to him, there's no more violence going on there. Yeah, but he's very upset about Christians being killed in Nigeria, which is bad. It's been a
Yeah,
long
I
standing
just want to
thing.
say if that were the scope of it, I would say good for him. but we should remember that communal violence in Nigeria is part of a larger picture of which he does not care at all, and that the answer in virtually none of the African cases would involve U.S. troops.
Yeah, it hasn't. The last time we sent in U.S. troops in a combat capacity versus a advisory support capacity or special, there's been special operations in particularly West Africa, often to rescue a missionary who shouldn't have been there anyway. But that's another whole story. We do sort of special ops and support roles, but in terms of
We haven't had combat troops in Africa since Somalia, and
that's what I was going to say.
that one didn't end well.
No, that's what I was going to say. So we do have limited military engagement and deployment in Africa, but not on a large scale basis, and not sort of regular troops since Somalia, and that was a disaster. And I don't think the American people would tolerate, that.
All right, talk to me about Tanzania.
Oh my gosh. So yeah,
So can we say it's a shagala-bagala?
it is, and it's so unusual for Tanzania. Tanzania has, to be clear, never been a full democracy, but has had free and fair elections. The main issue with Tanzania, the sort of last barrier to full, democracy in Tanzania has been that it is basically been a one-party democracy when it was a democracy, because the opposition was very divided and just sort of feckless, and so the opposition has never really been competitive. They've been allowed to compete more or less in the past, but they've never really been competitive. But and there was real progress, say maybe 10, 15 years ago. There was real progress in Tanzania for a number of years, and Tanzania has always been peaceful, like one of the most stable countries in Africa. Very peaceful. They just don't. They don't. They don't fight each other, and they don't riot and have violence. And I'm sure the security services, if they did, would have cracked down like they are now. But that's just not something you see in Tanzania. It's not that type of a place. But with the previous president, Magufuli, he was crazy, kind of crazy, but also he took Tanzania on a more and more authoritarian bent, where they were restricting the opposition parties. There was a attempted assassination against one of the leaders. There was detentions of leaders. He died of COVID. He was a COVID denier who died of COVID, which that also happened in Burundi. He died of COVID. The president, fun fact, the presidents of Tanzania and Burundi both died of COVID. And according to the official word, they did not die of COVID, but they died of COVID. And so then his successor, he had just been elected when he died, and his vice president was a woman, they call her Mama Samia, and she is a Muslim, which is unusual for Tanzania. She's so a Muslim woman became president, and she gave early signs of sort of trying to undo some of what he did and sort of walk things back from the authoritarian path that he had put the country on. And people were very positive. Actually, I think Kamala Harris as vice president met with her, like that was seen as, it was seen as a positive development. But as the election, which just happened, I think last week, approached, the crackdown on the opposition became more and more extreme, with detentions and, barring meetings and association of the main opposition party. Even a Kenyan activist who came down to sort of in solidarity with Tanzanian democracy activists. They were detained and mistreated, badly mistreated in detention, which was a big story and a big rift between Kenya and Tanzania. So it's been real bad, but what I did not expect, I knew that she would find a way to win. Obviously, she basically she had no opponent really to speak of, and so the whole thing was very rigged ahead of time, which is how you rigging on election day and ballot stuffing. That's so passe. You don't do that anymore. You
Right.
rig it ahead of time, which
The
is kind of
pros do it in advance.
yes, which is instructive for us, by the way, because Donald Trump they're trying some of those things now. You don't rig on election day, and in the U.S. it would be very, very, very hard to rig on election day. So she basically won the election ahead of time. But what I did not expect is that Tanzanians would rise up and not tolerate it. So there's been massive demonstrations, which is very uncharacteristic. I assume most of them are young people, and that this is connected to, this is sort of buoyed and connected to the larger wave of youth protests in Kenya, in Madagascar, in some other countries in Africa, but also around the world. So I assume the Tanzanian youth are sort of behind this because it's very, very unusual. And the crackdown has been extremely violent. So, I mean, the protesters have, they're very angry. They've been burning and looting and things like that. But then the crackdown on the protests has been very bad. And they've put a media blackout. They've cut off the internet. I saw they barred the public. She was actually sworn in, I think, overnight for us. And the public was not allowed. There was no public attendance or ceremony for that. My friend in Tanzania, I have a very good friend, Tanzanian friend, and I can't reach him. I mean, I'm pretty sure he's safe because he's not, as far as I know, he's not in Dar, the capital, and I think most of the violence is in the capital. But because of the internet being down, I can't reach him at all, and that's been a week. I haven't been able to reach him.
And is there any end game for this other than that, the protests peter out in the face of violent repression and that she is president?
Yeah. I don't think the difference between Tanzania and Kenya is, Kenya had a rigged election in 2007, and then there was explosive violence in reaction to that, and a lot of people were killed. But the international community sort of came in, and honestly, the Kenyan elite themselves were, I think, shocked by the reaction, and were sort of
the international community cares more about Kenya than it does about Tanzania.
I was going to say,
Kenya is a big country, and Tanzania is a small country, and Kenya is economically important in the region, and Tanzania is not. And I mean, Tanzania, from the international community's point of view, is just a big, safari destination, and presumably that stuff will, with some nightclubs in Zanzibar and some like cool tourist stuff, but it's not. It doesn't really deeply matter to the international community what happens in Tanzania, right?
It doesn't. Kenya is a far more important country, and also I would say the Kenyan elite are far more sort of plugged into deeper economic, like the Kenyan, they actually care that the Kenyan economy does well, etc. Like it's not because they're more developed. There's more of a investment in. Versus Tanzania, the elite do well mainly by corruption and stuff like that. There's not as much of a really developed, integrated economy in Tanzania. They were socialist for a really long time. So I don't think that the Tanzanian elite, and then the other big difference is the party, CCM, the ruling party in Tanzania, is they've been the only real party versus Kenya's election violence took place in the context of real competitive elections and and
Our discussion the other day about the death of the opposition leader,
yeah. I mean,
Odinga,
mhm.
and Kenya's always had meaningful. I mean, since Daniel Arap Moi's departure, has always had meaningful electoral competition.
Well, in 2007 when that happened, it was only their second one. So to be fair, but there had been a peaceful change in power. The ruling party lost in 2002 and the opposition won in 2002, and so there was that sort of precedent, and there was and Kenya as a culture has always been a very democratic culture. Even under Moi, I was always shocked at what the press could get away with. I mean, people were arrested and detained and beaten and all of that under Moi, and yet the Kenyan press was fairly bold at times, and the opposition, was fairly bold. I mean, it was courageous of them, but also, they got away with some, insubordination, I suppose. But yeah, Tanzania's and then of course you have the context of the Trump administration that previous administrations, it's been longstanding U.S. policy that we do care about democracy in Africa. That's kind of the one of the main pillars of U.S. policy, or has been in Africa since the end of the Cold War, is democracy promotion. That's like kind of the whole game. So in previous administrations, they may have there may have been some engagement repercussion. I don't really see that as that's not going to happen.
So what is going to happen? I mean,
I think
what from a U.S. policy point of view,
probably not
um,
much.
I mean, is our position going to be uh, just don't fuck up any safaris, anybody's vacations?
Yeah. I mean, expect maybe that a statement might be issued or whatever, but it's not going to be, I wouldn't imagine it's going to be paired with any sort of actual, sustained or, well thought out engagement. So I imagine they're going to crack down and, you know, and also, again, we're in the context of Tanzania is heavily in debt to China, and China is a huge partner for them, more than the United States. And obviously, China doesn't care. So,
Right. The whole theory of unconditional aid. Um, all right. So from bad to worse, let's talk about Sudan, um, where you don't even pause a genocide to have an election and rig it. What's the latest?
so last week, a huge development actually in the conflict, because in Darfur, so the country has been effectively partitioned for a while now, between the military, the regular military, kind of in the east and the north, and then the RSF, the paramilitary, in Darfur in the west and kind of into the south. And the south is really contested, but the military has had, they had, before the war began, they had outposts in Darfur, and they had they still had a presence. They were holding on to El Fasher was kind of the last city, and it's a major city in Darfur and a major military outpost. So they had been holding on to that, and El Fasher had been under a horrible siege for the last 18 months, and there was no getting in and out of El Fasher. There was no aid. There were people starving in El Fasher. People were trapped in El Fasher, which was terrible. Um, but it can always get worse in Sudan, because last week El Fasher finally fell to the RSF, to the paramilitary. Um, and in the big picture, that's pretty much secures the RSF's control over Darfur, and is Sudan is effectively partitioned. I expect the RSF is going to start. I mean, they had already started making moves, setting up a government over Darfur, and you basically have a de facto, sort of pseudo state in Darfur under the RSF. So I expect that they're going to continue to sort of flesh that out and claim that, Darfur is its own state while they continue to wage war for other contested areas in the country. But with the fall of El Fasher and the expulsion of the Sudanese military and the end of that siege, they have unleashed, just genocidal killing on the people of El Fasher, retributive. It tends to fall along ethnic lines, but they're also just killing anyone that they suspect of being sympathetic or to the military. So they're just wantonly killing, men, women, children. Yeah, I mean, it's terrible. And again, there's ethnic dimensions to that. We
Right. So
had
the
genocidal killing in Darfur
relevant
for a long time.
ethnicities here are Sudanese, Arabic-speaking Muslims, and um, uh,
African, Black
and
African.
Darfurian. I don't. What's the name of the ethnicity?
There's multiple ethnicities in Darfur,
But
but
they're not. But they're non-Muslim.
some of them
Uh,
are Muslim, but they're African. They're African. And to us as an outsider, if you looked at them side by side, they might not, because obviously over the years there's been a lot of mixing.
right.
And so if you look at them side by side, you might not see like, oh, they don't look, sometimes sometimes they're really black African and more Arab looking, but there's a lot in the middle. But to the Arabs in particular, they know who is, it's Arabs are better. And so if you can sort of claim to be Arab, that puts you on a higher footing. So they're basically murdering the African tribes and peoples, and also just anyone who they think aided the military at all, because the military has a lot of Arab you know they're representative of the military has representation from around the country and is also predominantly Arab. It's a different
And reminder here that the military is not the good guys.
yeah.
Um, right? The
Yeah,
military
well,
staged a
I think relatively speaking, they're better. But that's
well, I mean, there are, but remember that it was only a few years ago that there was a democracy movement in Sudan, and there was a constitution writing process, and the military was stepping back from politics and was, constructively engaged with a movement that was not that different from what we're
they
now
were
seeing in
they
Tanzania.
were pretending to be anyway.
Yeah, and then they crushed them like bugs and removed the civilian government and killed a shitload of people. So this is not a situation where you have Janjaweed, RSF, bad guys, and military good guys. This is a situation in which everyone fucking sucks, but the RSF sucks more.
The RSF is the regular military, or the SAF, Sudan Armed Forces. They, to the best of my knowledge, and the best, I should say, the most people think. I think I'll put it that way to cover my bases. Most people think the RSF started this conflict, and there was political oppression of the civilians by the military, but there was nothing like this. And the military has done retributive killings in areas that they've taken over from the RSF as well, but not on this scale.
Right.
And the military has armed sort of Islamist bands, these sort of militias who have done bad things, but again, not on the scale of the RSF. Like, for instance, in Khartoum, the capital, which was where this all started in 2.5 years ago, you definitely, and it was contested for a long time, and the military took it back over a few months ago, I think. Um, you definitely wanted to be in the military side of things versus the RSF side of things. And when the military took it back over, they were greeted as liberators. So they are better, but they're not good. They're not good, and that's been a real problem for U.S. policy. I witnessed that firsthand when I was still in the government. Just because when you don't take a side in a conflict, it's hard to have leverage.
Right.
You have limited leverage when you don't take a side. But I think we've learned from history and certainly from the Cold War that aiding a terrible side is not, in the long run, you don't want to do that. So I never thought that they should take a side because both sides were terrible. But the RSF has always been worse.
Yeah, I mean, the RSF
Is John
awful,
Jaweed, like
awful,
somebody said that
awful.
earlier. To be clear, the RSF was created during the last war in Darfur by Bashir, the dictator, which it was a military dictatorship. So Bashir and the military, the RSF was created as an offshoot, as a paramilitary, specifically to do genocide in Darfur. It was never really plausibly deniable, but technically it was more plausibly deniable than the Sudan armed forces doing it, and and just for sort of expedience sake.
Yeah, well, I mean, look, if you're gonna commit genocide, it is always a better idea to have irregular forces to do it, or specialized forces for that purpose. That's mostly how Hitler did it. Yes, there was major Wehrmacht atrocities during World War II, but the actual task of mass murder was mostly an SS thing, right?
Yeah, kind of like ICE. ICE is doing bad things
Well,
versus the rig.
it's just it's good to, we live in a world of labor specialization, and there are people whose job it is to fight wars, and there are people whose job it is to kill civilians, and it's mostly you want the people who know how to do the task at hand to do it. I want to ask you why the world does not care about Sudan. The magnitude of the killing there is, first of all, it is sustained.
Half
It
year
is, it
this
is,
time.
it's intense, and it is targeted at civilians in a way that, uh, there's no countervening, like, well, you could like, none of the arguments, for example, that the Israeli government can legitimately make about, Hamas exist here, right? And yet nobody seems to give a shit. And my question is, should I understand that as just racism? Should I understand it as, conversely, that we really only care about certain things when it's the Israelis or some big power that's otherwise on our mind for some reason? But that, like, the destruction of Uyghur communities, or what's going on in Sudan, we just don't care because it's not somebody who we've developed a particular mythology about that is important to validate. Or should I understand it as a kind of vicious cycle of, it's been going on for a long time, we've never cared, it cycles up, it gets worse, it gets a little better sometimes, and we just don't pay very much attention to it because it actually doesn't affect us at all? What's the balance in your judgment of what causes the apathy?
So the unsympathetic interpretation is yes, people, I mean, frankly, and I've said this before, you being an exception, Ben, but I find even among the elite educated classes, the knowledge of Africa is abysmal. Um, it's people, even in the US government, Africa is a very low priority and kind of, I don't want to say nobody cares, but um, nobody
Just
cares.
to give you a data point on this, every now and then, we do a Lawfare podcast on these subjects, often featuring Holly. They are some of the least listened
Of
to
course,
Lawfare
nobody
podcasts
knows
around.
anything about it. Why would they
And
listen?
if one end of our listener spectrum is when we do an emergency podcast on the Mueller investigation, or that's when you get these huge explosions, right? And if you do a lawfare podcast, as we recently did on Madagascar and Kenya, you're not going to get, it's only the corest of core lawfare podcast listeners who are going to do that. And so you make a choice like, do we care uh, enough to do it anyway? And our answer will always be yes to that question because that's our job. But there are a lot of news organizations who are much more dependent on clicks than we are and who aren't trying to serve communities that are looking for things that are undercovered that affect the national security space. And they will always and somewhat understandably make the opposite judgment. But that then does feed
But
a
it becomes
cycle
like
of
a vicious cycle. So
exactly.
I think some of the European outlet, like BBC, has really good Africa coverage because, but there's a sort of built-in interest there because a lot of these countries were colonies. So there's some, and there's a lot more migration, sort of direct migration of Africans to Europe. I think we have some large African immigrant populations, but I think proportionally, like proportional to the overall population of the country, like England is much more influenced by African immigration. So there's that, or in the diaspora. Um, so people don't care, and I don't think, I mean, there's some sort of latent, inherent racism there, I suppose. Although I can't say actual interest in Africa is even better among African Americans. They tend to have like a shallow, they have kind of a cultural impressionistic interest in Africa, but it doesn't run very deep. So I don't even think it's racism. I think it's distance, familiarity, connection. Geopolitics is a big one. I mean, so the sympathetic argument is, yeah, like geopolitically, as an analyst, I couldn't make a case to you that Africa is of the same consequence as the Middle East or something like that in terms of direct U.S. National security interests. So yeah, I mean, you can legitimately say that it does become like a self-perpetuating thing. And then most sympathetically, and again, it was kind of my job we don't do policy in the intelligence community, but obviously we provide analysis to undergird policy options, and we inform policy options, and we do opportunity analysis. And I can't, I couldn't, if you asked me like what our policy should be, I wrote a piece on lawfare earlier this year that basically said I couldn't tell you how to fix Sudan. Do you know? Like I couldn't tell you. So American interest in Sudan, there is a history there. Obviously, American interest
Right.
was American popular. That became a cause célèbre, the South Sudan, North Sudan war, which was a huge impetus behind the creation of South Sudan, which in hindsight, I'm not sure was that great. I mean, it stopped the war, I suppose, but now we have two failed states instead of one. So there's that. And now if Darfur becomes a state, we'll have three failed states instead of one. So I'm not sure that in the long run, like carving South Sudan really solved the problem. We also there you may remember from the early 2000s there was a huge Save Darfur campaign. Like I went to a rally in like circa 2002 down on the mall. It was a lot of Christian groups actually,
Right.
because it was this in the George Bush administration. There's this weird sort of specified interest in Africa, mainly through the lens of Christian persecution. That
But
fits
also
South
through the
Sudan.
lens of PEPFAR. I mean, there
Through the lens of
there
PEPFAR,
there were some great initiatives by the Bush administration
I
in
would
Africa.
argue that that was always an elite movement within white evangelicalism, and that leadership really matters. And George W. Bush, the fact that sort of George W. Bush and identifiable evangelicals decided to make this an issue. Michael Gerson could speak the sort of evangelical language. It was always an elite movement within white evangelicalism. And the masses of white evangelicals only cared because someone told them they should care. Or, the president, they claimed the president
But you
and
know
he
what?
cared.
That's fine.
No, it is fine. And it shows you
I
how.
think I think that's called leadership. And there
Exactly.
are
Leadership
millions and
matters.
millions of people who are alive today because President Bush
Yeah, absolutely.
told and look, I mean, there's a lot of things about my enthusiasm for the Bush administration is under control, and I'm not
Same,
I'm not
same, same,
making a
same.
general point, but on Africa aid policy. And, they did a lot of good work. And part of that work is just telling people to care. And
Absolutely.
I really don't have a problem
No, 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 no. I don't have a
with the
problem with it either.
shallowness of it.
No, no, no. I don't have a problem either, and that's why leadership is matters so much, and you see that clearly both with Bush, but you see it also with Trump that that whoever claims this mantle can then basically lead this large voting bloc by the nose. And George Bush did that to benevolent ends, and Donald Trump is doing that to pernicious, horrible ends. So, but going back to Darfur in the early 2000s, that activism, it was also a weird coalition in both to South Sudan and Darfur case, a weird coalition between white evangelicals and the black activists. So the Congressional Black Caucus. So that sort of made it more bipartisan as well, and it was an interesting alliance. So, but that activism helped get a UN mission in Darfur that eventually they deployed troops to Darfur, and eventually it did pacify things. But as soon as that mission pulled out it was on the ground for 15 years. It pulled out in January of 21, and immediately you start to see an uptick of some of the communal violence, and the communal violence basically feeds into this genocide. It helps to recruit and mobilize forces to do something like this when you're tapping into their own long-standing opinions and animosities. Like there's long-standing animosities between communities in Darfur. So the Janjaweed, I mean, there's you don't have to like cajole these Arab groups into killing the African neighbors, because those animosities run very, very deep. So as soon as the UN force pulled out, like it all started back up again. So so I don't know what the solution is. And the UN, by the way, is a much more feckless institution than it was 20 years ago. Partly because the US is not invested in it, but partly, it's just been, I think people are tired of, have grown weary of UN engagement that doesn't work out and doesn't actually do anything. And the sort of cycles of you put in the UN forces, they pacify things or not, or the war continues anyway, and then you pull them out, and the UN's failure has become like a self-fulfilling prophecy. And then some of the regional bodies, it's similar in Africa. So I don't know what the solution is. I think the easy one that all things being equal, the easy one that everyone points to is to lean on the UAE and Qatar. The UAE in particular is massively perpetuating this. They're massively propping up the RSF, and that's sort of perpetuating the conflict because it's made, the RSF shouldn't have been as competitive with the regular armed forces than it has been, but it's had all this outside support, mainly from the UAE, but from some other sources. Qatar's involved tangentially. But I mean, let's face it, even under the Biden administration, the UAE was our ally in the Middle East, and we
Right.
needed the UAE for other things, other bigger things,
We tolerate a lot of shit from the UAE.
We do. I don't. I try to not. I don't fly Emirates. I mean, to the extent that I can boycott the UAE, like I boycott
Yeah,
the
it's a little
UAE.
hard to boycott the UAE because every time you fill up your car with gas, some percentage of that is coming from them, and you don't know which percent. Look,
Fungible. Oil's
it is
fungible.
a it is an obnoxious, terrible regime that has amazingly good PR, and their capacity to co-opt people who should know better, both by funding them, which they
Definitely
do,
too.
and Qatar too. Although Qatar is
A lot
um,
smaller.
it's a lot smaller, and their capacity to co-opt people because they have this very urbane and uh, respectable seeming cadre of diplomats and spokesmen, and because they're smart about things like the Abraham Accords. And I mean, it's not all that they're
And the Trump administration's business interests.
right.
They're.
Although
I mean,
the
now it's
Qataris
like
are being really the
they're
Qataris are
all in
really
bed.
aggressive in that department.
Yeah, they
Um,
bought the Trump family like lock, stock, and barrel. So
yeah, and so I mean they're playing their cards very well and very smartly, but they are. And if you're listening, Ambassador Yusuf, horrible people, and and I do think people's toleration of them is you know, mystifying. Folks, we're going to leave it there. Maybe I will do a rant a
wow, we
different
didn't even get
day.
to my amazing trip. Wow.
Yeah, we'll start the show with it tomorrow. We'll do a little bit of rant about their exceedingly talented ambassador in Washington some other day. Um, Folks, we're going to be back tomorrow. Other than that, it's going to start with an account of Holly's trip.
Which is not that exciting, really, but
Which is very exciting. I really have no idea what it's going to be about. I don't know who's going to be here, except that Holly's going to be here if we're going to start with her trip. And I have no idea who the co-hosts or guests are going to be, but I know that you'll be here and I'll be there and I'll be wearing a dog shirt.
it's a good
And
one.
that's all you know on Earth and all you need to know, as John Keats might have said.